Unsiloed podcast is produced by University FM, elevating the stories of your institution.
Welcome to Unsiloed. This is Greg LeBlanc, and I'm here today with Ward Farnsworth, who is professor of law at UT Austin, former dean of the law school at UT Austin, and the author of a number of books. I don't know, I guess I can organize these books into three different buckets. You've got the books that are explicitly about law, including this one, The Legal Analyst, a toolkit for thinking about the law, which is absolutely fantastic. I'm going to, make it a required book next time I teach law and economics. Then you got another bucket of books, which I guess are the practicing philosopher books. We've got one on the Socratic Method and one on stoicism, called the Practicing Stoic, a philosophical user's manual. And then you've got these four books on, I guess they're called the classical English books. I only have the one here, which is argument, but then it's also, rhetoric and a couple others. So welcome, Ward.
Thank you, Greg. Great to be with you.
Well, I mean, look, I mentioned three different buckets of your books, but it sounds like you have a couple different buckets in your life as well. And, part of it is as a legal academic, and part of it is as, I guess, an amateur philosopher. Are we allowed to say that? I mean, I don't view the word amateur as in any way a derogatory term, right? It means somebody who really loves and has a passion for something. But I mean, I guess I was wondering if you could talk a bit about maybe the similarities and differences between the law and philosophy. I think it's sometimes hard for people now when they see whatever ambulance chasing lawyers and all this kind of stuff to think of the law the way, at least, I like to think of it, which is as this, I don't know, this profession which has a certain nobility to it, right? And it involves not just sort of theory, but practice. And you can sort of practice thinking like a lawyer, even if you're not a lawyer, right? So to what extent does philosophy help to inform your understanding of the law, either in theory or in practice?
Well, I think philosophy is for everybody, but I guess I'd say that one of the attractions of law as a field is that so much is relevant to it. If you really want to be a great lawyer, you've got to understand something about psychology. I think you've got to be a little bit of a philosopher. You've got to understand some economics. And this makes an attractive field. Philosophy especially, there's that book on the Socratic Method you mentioned. The Socratic Method is very relevant to legal education. And I think thinking in the way that Socrates modeled in the dialogues of yore is very similar to the style of thought that good legal education tries to help students learn to do. It seems to me there's a lot of affinities there, and that's part of why I was attracted to the subject.
Yeah, but I mean, oftentimes when we think like a lawyer, we have an outcome that we're looking for, right? But to be Socratic means that you don't really start with the outcome, right? In fact, you're not a partisan. You're not somebody who has, a dog in the fight.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's true. On the one hand, though, I'd say if you're doing legal education right, you're often trying to teach students how to think like a judge would. And a judge is trying to find the right answer, whatever that might mean, or the best answer. We can talk about the nature of the answers the judges search for. But I think in a case like that, it's helpful to be thinking not as if you have a dog in the fight, but as if you're trying to discover what the best way is to resolve the case. And then if you're a lawyer, you're trying to anticipate the way the judge will think and meet that. It's also true that if you're a lawyer, you're trying to understand your case and also the other side's case. And that's a very important part of what I call Socratic thinking, is being able to anticipate the response to whatever you're imagining, saying, or thinking, and to be good at going back and forth. If you're thinking about the analysis of chess, we do it in terms of ply. Like each ply is one move by one side. And so the analysis of a chess position is X number of ply deep. And I think a lot of legal thinking, a lot of philosophical thinking, a lot of everyday thinking can be improved by considering it in terms of ply. How deep are you going and thinking about not just what comes to mind for you, but what the response would be from somebody who saw it differently, what your response to them would be, and what their response to your response would be. That's good legal education. That's good philosophical education. That's good every kind of education as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I mean, look, the adversarial legal system, it works because you have these two different folks coming in and arguing, very, very different positions. And I think the Socratic method involves typically, a couple people. You need to run into somebody and then kind of get into an argument with them. But I think one of the points you were making is that to be truly Socratic, you kind of internalize that. You have a little Socrates inside your head that is kind of challenging everything that you believe, think, want, and all of your judgments, right?
I think so. I mean, that's the argument of the book, is that we're all familiar with the idea of an executive function that some people have developed well and some people don't have developed very well, the ability to delay gratification and organize and plan. And I think there's sort of a Socratic function that can be more or less well developed within a person. Not that you want to be Socrates, but you want to have a Socrates within, an internalized aspect of yourself that's basically Socratic in character. So I view the Socratic method as a style of thinking first, before it's a style of teaching or a way to talk to others. It's a style of thought. And the reason it's an effective teaching method, as far as I'm concerned, is that in the classroom, if it's used effectively, it can provide a model that you can internalize and use as a style of thought for yourself, which is important because most of us don't spend a lot of our lives engaged in real Socratic dialogue with others. So we have the 99% of our time when we're not doing that. What's going on then? And hopefully the answer is still something Socratic. It's obviously a lot easier to do well when you've got another person doing it because other people can see your own blind spots a lot more easily than you can uncover them. But still, in the end, I think it's trying to, the Socratic method I see as being a model for thought, that when thinking is going well is internalized, and it's something you do yourself.
I mean, it seems like philosophy, as you describe it, or the Socratic method, as you describe it, I mean, really, it's just about thinking, right? Thinking well,
Yeah.
And I love that you mentioned that, a lot of what you're describing as philosophy, it is in many ways indistinguishable from applied psychology in a way, right? I mean, it's about understanding the self.
Right.
It's understanding about how you come to believe certain things and how, you can be misled by habit and convention. And I like this idea. I think it was John Stuart Mill, maybe who also because the great thing about both these books is that you don't just focus on the Greeks. I mean, you move, you look at all these folks that have been influenced by them, but you talk about the mind left to itself and how that's, I guess it's sort of like a wild garden right? With, weeds everywhere.
Well, that's right. And you talk about the workings of the mind, and that's what I think is sort of the unifying theme of the different buckets of books you mentioned. I don't really think of them as in different buckets. To me, everything I do has a similar thrust. All the books are educational. All the books are efforts to think about thinking and to provide tools for thought and to refine the way that we think about problems, whether it's the Legal Analyst or the Socratic Method. They're tools drawn from different places, so they're different in that way. But I think they're unified because we can talk about the rhetoric books because those are you could question whether those are about thinking or about expression. But there's a very interesting relationship between thinking and expression that maybe we should come back to. So as far as the mind left to itself, right? That's the thing. Is Mill had the wonderful expression saying the Socratic method is a way to correct the way the mind operates when left to itself, because it's so prone to error. It's so prone to self-serving reasoning and thinking. Everybody can see this everywhere they look right now. When they look online at social media or in the news or the way politicians talk, it's harder to see it in yourself, but we're all prone to this. And the Socratic method I see as a kind of corrective for it. That's how I think Plato thought about it.
Yeah, I think you also said that if you wanted to imagine the antithesis to philosophy, it would be called Twitter.
Yeah, well, I wrote that, unfortunately, back when Twitter was called Twitter, and that's already obsolete. I should be careful about saying things that are that can be overtaken by events like that. But I do think that Twitter and social media in general are places where people really just enjoy expressing opinions. It feels so good to tell somebody off. And I think that's really very corrosive to high-quality thinking, which needs to sort of replace the love of having an opinion with the love of testing an opinion or reconsidering it or having it be challenged, the enjoyment of that. I think of social media as sort of giving everybody a megaphone. And the Socratic method isn't really about talking in a megaphone. It's about dialogue. It's about discourse and about the things discourse can do to advance the quality of our thinking. That's the idea.
Now, there's another metaphor that shows up, which is this, metaphor or analogy between thinking and martial arts or philosophy.
Right.
You said it's kind of like a martial art, and I guess that means that you must continuously practice it, right? And if you don't practice it, then you'll kind of get bad at it after a while, right?
Yeah, I think there's a lot to that. That's how I think the Stoics would have thought about philosophy. It's a very practical thing. You're going to be walking through a rough neighborhood, namely life, and dealing with a lot of challenges that, if your thinking is not consciously and deliberately developed, are probably going to knock you over a lot and rough you up. And so you can correct that with more attention to the way you think. And that's really the point of Stoicism, which the Stoics thought was nothing but an application and a descendant of the Socratic Method. But it's part of it is just making the mind more aware of itself and more conscious of the way it thinks, and making thinking more useful. The Stoics, as I said, a lot of the things that we recommend sound very difficult or impossible to people. I think what they would have said and did say is, well, it's like a martial art or an athletic pursuit or something. It's not something that anybody said was going to be easy, but if we're willing to put the kind of time we are into these physical endeavors, why can't we put them into philosophical endeavors, into the way we think, and see if we can't do a better job for ourselves?
Now, look, martial arts usually requires an opponent, and I think you said something. I mean, I forget who you were quoting. I've gotten all the quotes mixed up. Right? There's so many, but there's one where I don't know who it was. He said, if you go to the Olympic Games and you're the only participant in the race, then you don't really deserve much credit for coming out as the winner. And so, what is it that we're fighting with this martial art? I mean, is it ignorance? Is it, flabby thinking? Is it unhappiness?
We're talking about what the Stoics thought. I think they thought all those things. I think in the passage you're talking about, referring to how adversity actually is a very helpful force in life, although nobody wants it. On the other hand, most of what we value is a result of dealing with it. It's everything you just said, but I think above all, it's just mistaken thinking that Socrates would have said, I think, and the Stoics after him would have said, that most of us are in the grip of grotesquely erroneous thinking. And I say again, it's so easy to prove this. It's not a challenging thing. All you have to do is look at other people you don't agree with, see it right away. And then the hard part is realizing for ourselves the way that we're in the grip of a lot of the same kinds of mistakes. But good, clear, accurate thinking is the hardest thing that we do, I think. And Socrates' project, as I saw it, was trying to help liberate people from certain kinds of thinking problems.
Yeah, I mean, I like this idea. I mean, if you leave the mind to itself, I mean, it's not going to simply grow wild. I mean, it becomes subject to these corrosive influences, right, from the outside.
Right.
It could be convention and habit and the collectivity in which you live. I mean, there seems to be a certain form of entropy. It's not just that you're born with a mind that's chaotic. It's actually capable of getting worse, like the longer you live.
Well, I suppose it is. I mean, there are a lot of habits we have that may have been naturally selected because they served us well at various times. But, one of the things that the book talks about is the tendency to find beliefs first and then look for the evidence or the proof afterwards rather than the other way around. That's a very human tendency that all of us have. A lot of the ideas of the Stoics anticipate a lot of what you see in cognitive psychology now from people like Daniel Kahneman. A lot of the ideas of those researchers, you'll see a couple thousand years ago in the Stoics talking about the ways that our minds trick us, make us miserable, illusions we labor under, self-serving biases that we have. I view these projects as all very linked.
Do you think that the time that we live in now is comparable in some ways to the time in which Socrates and the Stoics lived?
Well, I'm sure it's very, very comparable. You read that stuff, and part of the fun is realizing that a lot of the problems we have are not that different from problems they had. But what do you have in mind? What are you thinking about?
Well, I mean, I was thinking about externals, and almost everybody I know is upset by the news, right, all the time. And I'm not judging anybody, and I certainly think that there's perfectly good reasons to be upset by all the things that are happening in the world, right? And in a way, if you're not upset, then it reflects poorly on you. It means that you don't seem to care about the world. But on the other hand, there's not much that you can do about what's happening in the Middle East. There's not much you can do about what, Trump is doing. It's hard to understand exactly, why people let themselves get as upset as they do in a way that's highly emotional without having a practical,
Yeah.
approach to how they're gonna do something about it.
Well, I think the Stoic question would be: Is it useful? Is it useful to get upset? How's that helping you, or how's it helping the things that you're upset about? It probably isn't. I mean, the usual Stoic view is, if you think about these things rightly, you can do everything you do if you were upset without being upset, or everything you would do if you felt great pity, but without the feelings of pity. That's the usual idea, is that if you're thinking rightly and carefully about the things going on in your world, you realize that there's a lot of reaction. When you're upset, you're not upset about what happens. You're upset about what you're thinking about it. And you can probably do better and have a more useful reaction. I mean, Stoicism is not fundamentally a self-regarding philosophy. It assumes we're all here to be chipping into our community in one way or another. But you want to be doing that actively and not by, sitting and wringing your hands.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing that I think you see all around you is this pursuit of status. It comes in all sorts of forms, right? Obviously, people want money, but they want recognition, and this seems like an endless and fruitless pursuit that people are engaged in.
Well, sure, and that's no different now than it was when the Stoics wrote. I mean, that's what I mentioned a minute ago, that a lot of the fun of reading ancient philosophy is realizing that the world hasn't really changed that much in some ways. I mean, we have new problems, and we have our internet, and we have artificial intelligence, and so forth. But we're also just humans, and human nature hasn't really changed much over this time. So when you read Seneca saying, this is the garbage that we wear our togas threadbare for, and you realize, well, we're not wearing togas anymore. We're wearing other things threadbare, but the garbage he was talking about is still the same. It's still people grasping for things that probably won't make them as happy as they imagine.
Well, I think you also had something in there about the lead pipe theory of the internet. I wonder if you could expound on that a bit.
Well, there's this theory you probably know, which is that the Romans had these miraculous waterworks, these wonderful aqueducts and so forth, and that the theory is that there is lead in these waterworks, and that lead poisoning, especially at the high levels of Roman government, led to the deterioration of thought and government and Roman civilization. I think that theory is generally regarded, people in the field, with great skepticism. So I'm not here to advocate for that theory, but I think as a metaphor, it's irresistible that we have our own equivalent of Roman waterworks. You have social media, which has these miraculous means, not for delivery of water, but for delivery of information and opinions that nobody could have imagined a quarter century ago and here we are with them. But they too, I think, secrete, or they bring with them a kind of poison, so that when you get your information, when you're drinking from that fountain, things come with it. It changes the way you think, and I think it makes people much more impatient in their thinking, much more prone to quick reactions, much more prone to enmities, all kinds of bad tribal habits. And I don't think this is a hard thing to establish. I mean, you can just look at what's happened to politics since the rise of these forces, and what's happened to mental health of young people. But that's the claim.
Yeah, look, I'm not surprised if you sort of stop a random person on the street and try to engage in a conversation. They're not going to find the time for it, right? But what I am surprised by is how difficult it is to engage in fruitful conversation with highly educated people, right? I mean, I've lived almost my entire life in university towns, right? On the East Coast, on the West Coast. And, it is very difficult to get people to they're very impatient. They just want to get to the point, right? Like, just get to the point. What's your point, right? And you're supposed to be, as an academic, pursuing truth. But I think maybe academics are more concerned with, getting the next paper out or finishing up the latest experiment, and they don't really have time for the kind of conversation that might help them to see new things. I mean, why do you suppose that is? I mean, shouldn't we expect different from our educated people than our maybe less educated people?
Well, maybe. I hope so. But it's also true that, I mean, one reason I find the Socratic method is interesting is that the Socratic ethic, or the ideas behind the method, they're pretty counterintuitive basically at all times. They require a lot of patience. The Socratic method's a slow-moving thing. And Socratic thinking, good skeptical thinking, it's very careful. It's one step at a time. And I don't think it's ever been very fashionable. It's really a correction of a lot of errors that the mind is in no hurry to correct. So I think we need it as much now as ever. And I don't think the Socratic ethic or the Socratic method are exactly all the rage in our universities any more than they are anywhere else. You'd think they would be, or you'd hope they would be. The universities would be sort of Socratic gymnasiums. That's how I always think about at their best. It's their places for testing ideas where dissent is welcome, it's even loved, because people understand that you're not going to get anywhere in your thinking unless you've got pushback on it. But everybody who's doing the pushing and the pushback has to be in it together, with a sense of good nature, not with an adversarial sensibility. And I think it's hard to maintain that. It's hard at any time. It's really hard now because academics live in the same culture as everybody else, and our culture's become, I think, politically increasingly tribal. I think these are tough times for the Socratic method, but I'm not sure there's ever been times for it that weren't pretty tough.
Well, in the world of business and software, we have this idea of technical debt, right? Where, you're building out your company and you just slap some solutions together, right? Which are going to come back later to haunt you, right? And so the big question is, if you spend a little bit more time constructing your IT infrastructure, then you won't have to be patching it, later on. And it seems like when it comes to philosophy and the pursuit of truth, we're going through life and accumulating all this debt because we're just trying to like, let's just get to the point, right? Let's just go right to the answer. And then you're sort of, building all these things, which later you've got to fix.
Yeah, I guess that's right. I think that, Socrates wasn't just interested in ideas. He was interested in people. His dialogues are usually named after people. They're named after the people he was talking to in the dialogue. We don't actually know if Plato named them that way, but it's a very apt way to name them because he's not just inquiring into whether a theory is true. He's examining a person and the beliefs they hold and whether they're consistent. And I think in most people, what you find once you start pressing with care is that most of us aren't very consistent all the way down. But unraveling that takes time and patience. If you don't do it, then you've got a kind of lack of integration of the self, which doesn't really necessarily feel like a problem. It looks like a problem when you see it in other people. I mean, I think the Socratic view is that a lot of people, maybe most of us, maybe to some extent all of us, are walking around in a kind of high-grade dementia that we're not aware of in the way that dementia patients are never aware of their own problems. But that if you could see it from the side, would appall you. And the Socratic method can be appalling in that way because it can help reveal things within your way of thinking about life that you realize you hadn't really slowed down enough to notice or understand or address or deal with. And then it makes you want to work to do better. But I just say that whole process isn't necessarily anybody's first choice recreationally. It can be difficult and painful.
Well, I definitely have fun doing it. My friends don't.
Well, that's the spirit.
You also use this term intellectual obesity, right? I thought that was another clever.
Well, you want friends who have a Socratic spirit, who are friendly, good-natured contrarians. I think we all need friends like that to call us out and tell us when we're wrong or suggest why we might be wrong, and we can do the same for them. That's supposed to be fun. I'm not sure most people find it very fun anymore, but I think that really is what academic life, I think, is supposed to be like, is welcoming of dissent, people who don't just try to avoid giving offense, but don't take any offense, because the person who corrects them or tells them they're wrong is doing them a great favor. And if they're wrong and if they're saying something that might seem offensive, they're bearing a personal cost for that, and they ought to be appreciated.
Yeah, I think people they view disagreement and potential disillusionment as a form of adversity, right, rather than as a form of progress or discovery.
Or they just view it as a hostile act. right? If you're contradicting what I'm saying or suggesting there's something wrong with it, then I get it. You're one of the enemy. And the idea that, no, that's your friend. The enemies are the ones who congratulate you for saying stupid things. Your friends are the ones who are trying to help you do better. But there's a way to do it, right? I mean, you don't have to be a jerk about it. I know sometimes people think of Socrates because they read him as undergraduates and they think, oh, he's the one who went around annoying people with obnoxious questions. But, that's only in some of the dialogues where he's dealing with his particularly pompous interlocutors. He's never the way with young people. And I think the Socratic Method done right, it's a warm thing. It's a friendly thing.
Yeah, and I think people have a misunderstanding of Stoicism. I mean, Stoicism is experiencing a comeback, I guess some people would say, but most people think of it as a rather, I don't know, dour view of the world. But it's actually yeah, but in fact, it requires a great deal of humor, right?
I think so. I mean, the problem there is the word stoic in modern English has a meaning that's sort of grimly suffering without complaint or something like that. That's really not what philosophical Stoicism is about. So it labors under this unfortunate label that misleads people. But I think accomplished Stoics tend to be good-humored about things that other people find no humor in whatsoever. A lot of the difficult things in life, because a lot of Stoicism is sort of the art of perspective, and it's seeing things from an angle that gives you a different reaction to them, that's sometimes not the agonized, grim reaction that people have to all sorts of things ordinarily, because the Stoics view that as a choice. Your perspective's a choice. And so learning how to be conscious of that and deliberate about it and do it usefully, that's a really helpful habit. And I don't think Stoics are grim at all. Like, they're less grim than most people if you get to know people who really like this stuff.
Well, what I like also about the Stoicism book, as I mentioned earlier, is that you show that there have been Stoics throughout history, right? These, Montaigne and Johnson, of course, in particular, are ones that have embraced a lot of Stoicism. I mean, I think, can you, I don't know, be a Stoic without reading Epictetus? And without, it seems like cognitive behavioral therapy is in many ways kind of a modernized version of certain aspects of Stoicism.
Well, the cognitive behavioral therapists would be the first to say so. That school of thought was, I think, explicitly descended from Stoicism. But of course, I mean, there are a lot of people who are more or less natural born Stoics to some extent. But to really get it, I think you need to read it. You don't necessarily have to read Epictetus, and I've tried to write a book that makes some of these ideas more accessible. As you say, there's others who have brought them forward, and the book tries to identify what I call descendants of the Stoics, who weren't quite, I wouldn't call them Stoics, but they were influenced by the Stoics, and so you can get a lot of Stoicism out of them. You mentioned Montaigne, he's a great example. A lot of Schopenhauer is like that. He's got a lot of great things to say. I wouldn't call him a Stoic, but he loved the Stoics. And you can tell because he talks about them, and he gives a kind of updated expression to a lot of what they said.
Well, I think a lot of people would say that a philosophical approach to life, and in particular a Stoic approach to life, might require some disengagement from the affairs of the world. I mean, this is clearly not true. I mean, Marcus Aurelius was definitely in the thick of things.
And Seneca too.
Yeah. And of course, you are in the thick of things. Have you found that, I don't know, achieving the heights of academic administration like you have, is this something that was achieved because in part or in spite of, in part, your philosophical approach to life?
Well, I don't know if I'd identify with that, but let me just say, it's certainly not despite. I mean, as you say, Stoicism, it's one of the other bad raps it gets is that it's a philosophy, as you said, of disengagement. Far from it. I mean, the Stoics' view is that your obligation is to others, and so being involved in public service in some way, even if the public just means your immediate circle in the world, but it also could mean something larger, that's the Stoic obligation. And so the idea of being engaged in some constructive activity in the world, that's what Stoics try to do. I wouldn't say that's initially why I did it. I became a dean because I love education, and I like trying to help students and help them think better, more clearly, more usefully, maybe more bearably about the things that they have to think about. And so the chance to help solve problems in that field from the dean's chair instead of from the faculty chair was just an interesting set of challenges.
Now, do you think that, the Socratic method, the way we think about it in education, this seems to be on its way out. I remember as a kid growing up and watching Professor Kingsfield,
Yeah, right.
and had a certain view of what, law school was like. And I certainly experienced a little bit of that. But from what I understand, that's sort of, and I try to replicate at least part of it in the way I teach in business school, right, using the case method. But I'm like one of the few holdouts that still uses the case method in business school. And from what I understand in law school, it's kind of on its way out as well. So I guess, first of all, why do you think that is? What is it about the case method and the Socratic method which is losing its appeal?
Well, I hope you're wrong, but maybe you're right. I don't know. I think the Socratic method is as important and crucial in the classroom as it's ever been. But a lot of people have, I think, misguided understandings of what it means to be Socratic. Like there's some people who think, Socratic method in law school, isn't that where the professor, puts the student on the spot and tries to embarrass them with questions they can't answer and
humiliate them.
Yeah,
right?
Humiliate them, right? Like Professor Kingsfield in the paper chase you mentioned. That's really never the idea as far as I'm concerned. The Socratic method is just, it's interactive. It's putting questions to students that challenge them and teach them to internalize the process of foreseeing the comebacks to what they're saying and taking them seriously and having to refine what they say in view of the comeback and then the comeback to the comeback. It's like I said before, it's teaching students how to think self-reply deep, which is something the good lawyers have to do and that all of us want to do, whatever we're doing. And I don't think that's easy to do through a lecture. If you're just trying to impart information, to me, a lecture is very inefficient. You could give students things to read instead of being lectured to. I like to use class time for things that can only happen in a classroom. And for me, that means let's be interactive. Let's have a conversation, because that's something you can't just create by handing out reading. And so what you might call it conversational teaching instead of Socratic teaching, if it takes the threatening edge off of it. But the idea is to make it a challenging conversation. And again, to do what I said earlier, which is not, students imagine that when they're being questioned Socratically, I think many of them imagine, it's like a quiz. They're being put on the spot to see, how much did you understand? Am I going to smoke out that you didn't do the reading? There are teachers who do that, but that's not what I mean by the Socratic method. I have no interest in that use of questioning. I think it's tedious. To me, the Socratic method, as I said, is trying to role model a style of back and forth, skeptical and self-skeptical thinking by doing it out loud between two people so the student can internalize that and do a better job for their clients later, do a better job for themselves. That's what it's about. And I think that it's a perfect use of classroom time. Although, again, it's an inefficient way of transmitting information, but class in general is probably answers to that description.
Well, some would say that the decline in this approach is due to the heightened sensitivity of our students, but others would say it's because it's really hard. It's more difficult, requires a lot more work, a lot more preparation from the teachers, from the instructors, right?
I think that's true. I think that the Socratic method is more difficult. If you lecture, you just have your notes, show your slides. Nowadays, your PowerPoint. The Socratic method, you really got to think about all the different places that answers to your questions can go. It's been said the Socratic method is a lot easier when you can script the answers as well as the questions you're going to get. But you can't script them in real life. You got to take what you get from the students and you got to be able to go with it. So you really got to be on your game and on your toes to be able to take whatever the student says and work with it constructively and skeptically and critically, but never in an embarrassing way so that it's always positive for the student. At least that's my goal, is to make the experience always positive for the student. I don't want them to walk out feeling embarrassed by anything. We're all in this together trying to come up with answers to hard questions or learn how to think about them. But so you want to challenge, but I think it's up to the instructor to make it you mentioned earlier, you think it's on the outs because students are sensitive. I don't think the Socratic method used properly should be offensive at all. I just think the instructor has to establish what I call in the book Socratic rules of engagement at the beginning of class, where you sort of put a frame around what is going to be happening in the school and in the class. And you explain this is a place for dissent. This is a place to develop and grow thinking and ideas. better, to bring them forward. And that only happens when they get challenged, even when the challenge doesn't have merit. You've got to understand why it doesn't have merit. You've got to, as Mill said, the person who understands only their own side of the case knows but little of that. So you've got to welcome the other side. You've got to want that. I mean, if you're really Socratic in your orientation, you don't really like being in a room where everybody agrees in a self-congratulatory way about something controversial. You don't like it. It feels weird. It feels unhealthy. You want a gadfly in the room, and you want that in the classroom. You want to be around people you disagree with. At the school where I teach at the University of Texas, we've got students who have all kinds of views, and I established this early in the semester, is that they have really different politics, wide range of students. I think that's great. You should want to be at a school like that. You should want to be around people you agree with and people you don't agree with, because that's what advances and pushes thinking forward. That's such a basic idea that I think has often been lost, that universities don't affirmatively want to bring in people who disagree, because they think, those people are idiots, or they annoy me, or whatever the reason. We already got this figured out. I think that's kind of a recipe for stagnation. You should really want that. Now, it's not easy to find interlocutors or adversaries who you respect and feel like are going to play by your rules, but that should be a high priority, I think. If you're trying to create a climate, a situation where thinking's going to move forward and people are going to be smarter for the time they spend in it, I think you have to think of it that way.
Yeah, I mean, the homogeneity that we see in our student body, it's hard to distinguish between how much of this is selection and how much is treatment, right? I mean, are we, admitting only people that have shared viewpoints, or are we forcing them to have sort of shared viewpoints from the way in which we encourage them to interact with each other and in the classroom?
Well, totally apart from what we encourage, I think a lot of students pretend to have very similar viewpoints because they don't want to be despised by their colleagues, their classmates, because they think the wrong things. And, you see, of course, I can't stand that wherever I see it. I don't like it when you have students who are, saying vapid things or saying nothing much because they're afraid that somebody's going to think they aren't liberal enough. And I don't like it when there are things you can't say because you're going to get ostracized by people on the right who think that's a bunch of nonsense to be repudiated. That entire mindset where people are taking turns, treating the people they don't agree with as repellent. That's just, to me, the opposite of what academic life needs to be like, is that you should be eager to understand other people. Because first of all, there might be, even if they're wrong on balance, there probably is some merit in what they think, and you need that. You want to extract the good and the accurate in what they say. If they disagree with you, they're probably onto something. It doesn't mean that they're right and you're wrong, but you probably have something to learn from them. And that's what's going to move your thinking forward. That's how it seems to me.
Yeah, I don't know which is worse, to have two groups of people, yelling at each other through megaphones, at a protest, or to have everybody just nodding their head and agreeing for the sake of agreement.
Okay, so we're trying to find an approach that's neither of those things, and that to me is the Socratic approach. It's dialogical, and it seems obvious that that's the way you'd want to run any educational institution. It doesn't seem like it's treated as culturally obvious, but Socrates is supposed to be the most illustrious name in Western thought, and I think that the Socratic ethic deserves a revival in our universities and in our culture everywhere else.
Well, you said that at the beginning of the Socratic book, one of the reasons why you wrote it is because the method is not explicitly taught, right? Even when people read Plato, they don't actually have any explicit discussion about what's going on in the dialogues. But I mean, could we change that? Is there a way that we could incorporate into education something which would help people to think like philosophers, think like lawyers even? Make that sort of a ground rule for just higher education?
Yeah, I wish. I mean, you're right that the Socratic method, a lot of times I write these books and I think, I'm surprised these books don't already exist. Hasn't somebody written a book about the Socratic method? Well, it turns out they hadn't really exactly been done, but it needed to be done because if you read Plato's dialogues, they don't explain the Socratic method. You have to sort of infer it and see and reverse engineer it. But if that were up to me, that'd be one of the very first things that our education system's about, as opposed to now where it's something that most people actually never learn about. I mean, if they ever learn about Socrates or Plato, it's part of some elective in philosophy. And when they read that, they read the Republic, and they don't really, they get what Mill would call the dogmatic side of Plato and not the Socratic method. But to me, the method is a style of thought that's kind of thinking 101. And I would like to see it being at the root of the ethic, the basic concept to be behind all education, not just legal education.
Right. Well, I mean, rhetoric used to be at the center of a liberal arts education, right? I mean, you would learn methods of persuasion, right? You know, and logos, and ethos, and pathos, and all that stuff, right?
Yeah, all the stuff I care about the most seems to be off the menu for the most part, but I'm doing my best to bring it back. I mentioned this at the beginning. It's an interesting question, the relationship between rhetoric, between speech and careful, accurate, effective expression, and thinking, and good, careful thinking. You know, I mean, I'll put this to you because it's an interesting issue. You think about the statesmen in each era, each century, who we've regarded as the most far-sighted thinkers and the most interesting, insightful people. Maybe Burke or the founders in the 18th century, maybe Lincoln in the 19th century, Churchill in the 20th century. All of these are also the people you'd think of as the most rhetorically accomplished. Like Lincoln is, I think, certainly the most rhetorically accomplished person in the history of American public life. Churchill, very famous for his extraordinary ability with words. Same with Burke and the founders. Why is that? I mean, it's not a rhetorical question. It's a live question. I think it's interesting. In law schools, it seems very natural to pair these things. Law schools are about learning how to think a certain way, thinking like a lawyer, whatever that might mean, and also about communication and persuasion. These things are thought to be very natural partners. But if you really think about designing curriculum and what education ought to be about, is it that people who are good at one of these things tend to be good at the other? Is there some inherent relationship between the quality of thought and facility with language because we think in language? Is that what's going on? If you have thoughts, I'm interested because I consider this a very it's a deep issue.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're forced to put something into language that you know will be exposed to scrutiny, then you can't afford to be sloppy in your thinking, right? And so I think it's discipline. I mean, you talk about how if you are, you know, practicing a martial art or a sport, right, in preparation for battle. I mean, I think if you know that there is going to be a battle, if you know that you will be entering into the arena, it will change the nature of your practice quite a bit, right?
Well, certainly. And so it may be that anticipating rhetorically and through words what you're going to be dealing with forces you to refine your thinking. It might be a question of that. But for whatever reason, I think these go together well. I mean, a good example is I have this book on metaphor. And metaphor, I think, classically is considered a branch of rhetoric. It's a technique you might use to persuade. But metaphor is also, at least I argue, is a tool for thought. And that thinking metaphorically or making comparisons between things that on their surface looked unalike, it's a very powerful way to advance your thinking. And a lot of great ideas have been great metaphors. That's an example of something, of a device, a tool, that as far as I'm concerned, it's central to thought and to rhetoric. And it really shows these things are hard to separate. And I think educationally, they both ought to be right at the center of how we think about the mission of a university or a secondary school, any school. We're trying to develop students who are going to be ready to be great citizens and enlightened people, directly thinking about thinking and how we do it well, and how other people do it badly, and how we perhaps also do it badly, and how our speech betrays us, and how effective rhetoric is an instrument of effective thinking. I would think that would be on the syllabus or in the curriculum all over the place. But in fact, I don't think that's how it is at all.
Yeah, it's the metaphors that I'm going to remember from these books, right? Like the pedestal is not part of the man, right? I mean, it's impossible to forget that image, right? Once you see it, or, you know, the sunny room, right? Which is, it's not a sun. The room's not sunny unless the sun is there, right? I mean, these are images that you keep with you for a lifetime, and they shape how you think about the
Yeah,
world.
there are a lot of beautiful metaphors that Socrates and the Stoics both offered, but a lot of beautiful metaphors, and not just beautiful. I mean, I think ideas are beautiful, and that's one reason I try to write these books, is to make their beauty more available to people who share my ideas about what counts as interesting. But beyond the beauty of them, they're useful. They're ways to advance thought. You know, I made that comment about statesmen like the founders or Lincoln or Churchill. We could have done that with judges. A lot of the greatest judges are also the most rhetorically gifted judges, and also the judges who have the greatest ability to come up with a beautiful and useful and persuasive and influential metaphor. You know, Oliver Wendell Holmes is very much like that. A lot of his fame is based on a gift for metaphor that he had. I think metaphor, you know, it sounds like a frill, something for an English major. Well, it's also the most influential thinkers and statesmen are often people who have a gift for finding the right comparison that moves people and helps them see something they don't understand in terms of something they do understand. And again, I think that's something that's a very valuable, powerful set of ideas that's really severely undertaught by, I think, in our educational system.
But it's only those who study law that really get exposed to the amazing thought and writing of judges, right? I don't know whether that's always been true, because I get the sense that the law has maybe, it's less central to American life than it may have been in the past. Do you think that the law has, I guess, receded from its position of centrality in American life? I mean, you know, de Tocqueville talked about the law in a couple ways. One is he said that every American is involved in some kind of lawsuit pretty much all the time. And I don't know whether that's true. We might be in class actions, but we're not really doing a whole lot of lawsuits. But the other thing he said is that the lawyers, right, they had a special role in American society as the kind of aristocrats, the ones that kind of kept the civilization, you know, functioning well. You know, if you think of Atticus Finch, right? You know, like every town has this person who is expected to be educated, articulate, have good character, and so forth. I mean, do we think that those days are over?
Well, of course, I don't. I'm a law professor. I can't bear the thought. But actually, I think law seems to me pervasive. I mean, who right now isn't thinking about law? I think it's front and center, especially right now in America. Now, in terms of lawyers, of course, have taken hard knocks forever in all times and places. But I think part of the mission of a law school is to produce lawyers who aren't just able to handle a client's problems, but who are also able to take their place in the civic order that you've described, which is being the people who understand what the Constitution is and what it's about. And they can talk about it with their friends and neighbors. And they can be alarmed when there's cause for alarm. They're keeping an eye on the store, they're minding the store. And so I think that's something that law schools need to do. Now, I actually think that's something that our entire educational system actually needs to do, and that we probably don't do as well as we should. I just think law schools are more pronounced case. But it seems to me that what I'm describing is something that ought to be within the reach of every citizen, given that we house them in our schools for a very long time at the start of their lives. There ought to be plenty of time for this. But as with a lot of other things we've discussed, it doesn't really have the central place that I wish it did.
Well, it also doesn't really have a central place in our education. I mean, now that it is a graduate degree, and it's been a graduate degree for a while, it means that most people don't get any exposure to the law as undergraduate. Yeah,
sure. But under I mean, I'm just talking about under the heading of what you might call civics education, which is sort of maybe it's a slightly antiquated word, but it's really what I'm talking about. It's putting basic understanding of law and government within the hands of everybody, on the theory that this is just part of citizenship. You have to understand these things. And not only understand them, you've got to be able to think critically about them, and not just take what you're being fed because it's convenient, because your tribal interests are served by the person who's saying it. I mean, that to me is sort of the great disease of our times. And the only thing we've got to work against that disease is our educational system. And that system ought to be inoculating young people against that from day one and pervasively throughout. And right now, I don't even know that it's done deliberately at all, let alone done first.
Well, but I think also the idea was that lawyers, they were paragons of at least some kind of virtue. And it seems like virtue is something that we don't see as being an important part. The cultivation of virtue, we don't see that as an important part of education.
Well, I hope you're wrong. I hope at my school, at least at my little law school, we're working on producing lawyers who have a sense of honor and a sense of honesty, and that regard these things as central to their calling. But again, I wouldn't limit that to law schools. I'd like to think that at my university and at all universities and at all secondary school, all schools, we ought to be thinking at all times about this. What kinds of people are we creating and putting out there? I mean, it's really an amazing thing we do, that we take our young people and their full-time business for at least the first 16 years of their lives, and usually for many more. It's just education. We just put them in schools and we try to form them and teach them things. And it seems to me that a lot of the things that I think on reflection we'd all agree are probably the most crucial and foundational are often things that aren't actually found in the curriculum. It's quite astonishing, I think, when you step back from it. But in any event, I mean, I'm sort of just recounting the motive behind a lot of my own scholarship, which is trying to provide educational resources that do some of the things that I think just aren't done enough. And it's merely my own idea about that. But and I write for the many, or more likely the few, who share my sensibilities about these things.
Well, I thought this might be the one podcast where I didn't mention AI, but here I am mentioning, because, a lot of people are thinking that, oh gosh, this AI thing is going to make people stop thinking and so forth. But, I have a different view, which is that this might actually free us up in the educational system to actually focus on the things that matter, right? So instead of, just downloading information, which is what a lot of education has become, we can spend our time teaching people how to think and how to discuss and how to ask questions and maybe cultivate virtue.
I wish. I'm pretty skeptical, but that AI is going to have that effect. So I think if we were really committed to doing those things, we could do them now. I mean, when you say that, you're making it sound as though the reason we don't do these things better now is there's no time. We'll have more time with AI. Now there's no time. We're too busy doing other things. I don't know about that, Greg. I mean, when I look at the things we are spending our time on, I'm not usually that impressed by the urgency of them, in the sense that, we couldn't possibly squeeze in more important things if we wanted to. We could if we wanted to. We don't want to. The Socratic method, real skepticism, it's never been a popular thing. It's not I mean, the thing is that, as I said earlier, the mind doesn't love this. It's a process of the mind questioning itself and calling itself out on the delusions that it foists on us. And that's just not the mind's first choice. It's not immediately rewarding. And so I think that most people don't have a very natural appetite for this, and they don't see it as being crucial. If you question them Socratic style, they'll reach the conclusion that, that actually would be really great, but it doesn't come to mind first. So yeah. I'm not really very optimistic that AI is going to lead to this wonderful renaissance of critical thinking, although I'd love it if that were true. It's, of course, hard to know what it will lead to. But I do worry a lot about AI replacing people's own ability to write and think as critically, because they have a crutch, and it's often said in the same way that nobody remembers phone numbers anymore because they're all built into their phones. Nobody remembers directions anymore because they're all built into their phone, map phones or Google Maps or whatever. I already see coming on soon a situation in which most people rely on most of the grunt work of writing. They rely on AI, which means they don't really learn how to use language in the ways that great writers and great thinkers have always known. I said earlier that the greatest thinkers, the most insightful thinkers, have been great communicators, great masters of language. I'm not sure how great a thinker you can be without a mastery of language. And I'm not sure how much of a master of language you could be if you're relying on AI to do most of the heavy lifting. So I do worry a lot about a softening of people's critical and rhetorical faculties as they come to rely on machines that seem like they can do it at least as well. So why not let them do it? And the answer is, well, do you want to be a thinking being of your own, or don't you? So, you won't see any students of mine being allowed to use AI in any way, shape, or form, but that's only going to go on as long as they need me in the first place.
Well, I mean, to get back to the analogy with the mind and the body, it seems like the body left to its own, right, is going to get flabby and fat and lose all fitness. Same too with the mind. And for many people, exercise can be boring, and we don't really have a natural instinct to go and run on treadmills. But we can make exercise fun and yet have an awareness of the deadly seriousness of the need to exercise. How can we make this type of enterprise, the philosophical enterprise, philosophical life, one that is both deadly serious and also fun?
I just think only by example. You've got to have teachers who love it. You've got to love the Socratic method and the Socratic spirit. If you feel it strongly, then you can infect students with that. I mean, that again, I go back to Mill because he's really a central figure in the Socratic Method book, because a lot of people don't know this, but he was a great aficionado of the Socratic Method. He translated a bunch of Plato's dialogues. And he points out that some of the Socratic dialogues are full of fallacies. They're not logically impeccable. But nevertheless, they're very inspiring because you see somebody with this extreme devotion to critical thought, to delving in and finding the truth. And he said it's really that sense of commitment that inspires others that's more important than the perfection of the logic. And I think that's true in teaching as well, that if students are with a teacher who's passionate about ideas and passionate about learning and passionate about welcoming and loving dissent and not treating it as the act of an enemy, but treating it as a kind of act of construction of something better, then I think the students can internalize that. I don't think they get there by being told this is a good thing. I think they might get there by being around people who feel it's a good thing and can exude that and can transmit that to them by example. I think that's basically how most good teaching happens. First, you have to have teachers who actually believe this. Yeah.
But I mean, you've got to believe that those faulty arguments coming out of the mouth of Socrates were put in there intentionally, right? To make us aware of the fact that, that he wasn't always the most sensible person.
Yeah,
right?
Probably. There's actually a lively scholarly debate about some of the fallacies and whether they're definitely fallacies and whether if they were deliberate. The part of the fun of Plato is that he's always indirect and we don't really know what he was up to. But I'm just saying that whether they were there deliberately or not, a lot of the magic that those dialogues can do or have done historically, even if they're not all that popular now, hasn't just been by the impeccable reasoning. It's by the display of what it would mean to be somebody whose commitment to getting at the truth was greater than their commitment to anything. And that's not really a live human being, but it's an aspect of the self that we'd all like to cultivate. And I think our educational life is about trying to cultivate.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to do in the classroom. I find that sometimes I'll take a position purely for the sake of provoking a discussion, and after the fact, they'll say, "Oh, professor said this," right?
Right,
and say as if it's something that I am expressing out of a sense of belief.
Well, I think part of the art of the Socratic method, as far as I'm concerned, in a classroom, is putting the right frame around it so that the students understand what's going on. As I said earlier, that a lot of students imagine that when they're being questioned Socratically, it's a kind of quiz. They can also make a different, which is not, that's a mistake, but they can also make the mistake you've described, which is imagining that everything you say, you're saying because you believe, when in fact you're often saying it because it's useful. My basic position is whatever my students say, I'll push back. Not an effort to embarrass anybody or show them they're wrong, but to show them that usually, again, Mill said, in everything but math, truth is usually not a question of absolutes. It's a question of whether more can be said on this side than on the other side. And so you've got to be able to see the warts, the drawbacks in your ideas, the trade-offs that any hard question probably involves. And it's my job to just bring those back in response to whatever's said. But my point is, if you make that explicit, if students understand what the Socratic game is and why it's played, they receive it differently. They receive it better. They realize what's going on. I think it's very useful. I mean, I just tell them outright, my goal in our back and forth is to try to provide a model of questioning for you to internalize that I hope will be of some use to you. And once they realize that, I think they receive it a little differently. They don't feel like this is a hostile thing or it's an effort to embarrass them. They understand we're trying to study here some methods of thought. And the best way to take the methods of thought that amount to an internal conversation, the best way to learn those is to have an external conversation that can resemble that. But it's no good unless there's back and forth. There's no good unless there's pushback. If without that, nothing's happening.
Yeah. I think and the hardest part for many people is that this requires that you take a very charitable approach towards the people you are interacting with. And
Yeah.
sometimes it means that you have to even make their arguments better for them, right?
Definitely. That's right. I think part of the Socratic ethic is that you want to take on counter arguments against your view in their best form. So there's no gotcha about it. If somebody's making a mistake in the way they're making their argument, you want to rephrase it to help it be as strong as it can be and as inconvenient as possible for you. And then you want to deal with it in that form. Likewise, when people say things, if there's two ways to interpret it, one that's more offensive and more personal and one that's better, you always want to interpret things the better way. Just as, of course, you want people to interpret what you say in the best possible way and to help you forward. But the point is that is part of the Socratic method. And Socrates will do that. I mean, he'll say, let me see if I can help you put your point into the best possible form. It can be the strongest form. And then let me reckon with it in that form. I mean, that again, to me, that's good intellectual etiquette. And that's something every student ought to be learning about, is what it means to argue in good faith by taking what the other person says and putting it in its best light before you try to reckon with it. It's such an obvious idea. And yet I have law students who I talk about that with and think, oh, I've never heard that expressed that way before. I think, how can that be? Don't you think that ought to be one of the first things that our young people learn about how to talk about things when they disagree? I wish it were. But anyway, it's one of the first things I talk about. I think it's crucial.
Well, I can't let you go before I ask you about this book, The Legal Analyst, because
Okay.
it's sort of like a treasure box of frameworks and insights that you can use to understand the world. And most of them are drawn from the social sciences, and a lot from economics. And law is what's great about law is it's kind of like a clearinghouse for everything human, right? It's nomos, right? It's if it's
Right.
human, it's in there. And
Exactly.
and
Yeah.
and yet, on the one hand, traditionally law schools didn't have courses on economics or sociology or anything, but nowadays it seems like we have law and everything, and it makes you wonder,
Yeah.
whether law even has an independent domain that is not just an offshoot of these other disciplines. I mean, what's the relationship between law and all the other social sciences, humanities?
Well, it's a wonderful question. I don't think of law as being, as they say, an autonomous discipline of inquiry in the same way that economics is, or psychology or sociology. And yet I do think lawyers have a distinctive activity that they engage in, which does involve drawing on ideas from those other fields, but it's also its own thing. The working through cases and drawing analogies and learning how to find a well-behaved principle, which is what every case needs to be resolved. That's a lawyer's activity that I don't think has an exact analog in those other fields. So I'm not sure it's sort of a set of tools for understanding the world, but it's definitely a distinctive thing that lawyers do that nobody else quite does in the same way. And so I do think there's a lot of things that lawyers learn in law school that aren't just borrowings. In fact, the most central things. They're really not just borrowings from those other fields. But as I mentioned at the outset, and I think we agree, part of the pleasure of being a lawyer, at least being a good one, is that you are really, if you're going to do it right, really obliged to draw on so much else. I mentioned earlier having to learn about psychology, maybe a little philosophy, maybe some novels too. You've got to be able to understand human nature and empathize with humans in different situations. And I think that's part of the pleasure of the lawyer's challenge if it's appreciated in full. Not every lawyer thinks of it that way, but I think that is the right way to think about it if you want to be great at this thing, this activity. And it's also what makes it so rewarding, that being a lawyer puts you in touch, in contact with all these different traditions of thought that are all so interesting and they're all relevant to what you do.
Well, and also in a way, I mean, if you can think like a lawyer, it means that you have, I think, a superpower, which enables you to engage any of these disciplines and sort of sort out the arguments that make sense from the ones that don't make sense, right? In fact, judges are continually put in a position where they have to determine whether something is legitimate science or not, right?
Yes, that's often so. I mean, a lot of what's central to what lawyers and judges do owes nothing to the other social sciences. You're working for an internal consistency within a system, consistency with precedent, consistency with a text that's on point, whether it's a constitutional or a statutory text. Try to interpret it The right role of worrying about consequences in ways that are relevant, that to which social science research is relevant. That's a hot issue and a controversial issue. On any given day, your typical judge and lawyer is not touching that stuff. But on the other hand, I think an understanding of all that helps put what you are doing into perspective. It helps you understand it better. That to me is the value. Even if you're not using it directly, it helps you understand what you're doing. And that to me is a very powerful thing.
Well, maybe to wrap up, if you could, and I know as a dean you can't do this, but if you could design legal education from the studs up, right? I mean, what would you do with these 3 years that you have?
That's probably a conversation for a whole other day. I'd allow a lot more variety, I think. Legal education is sort of a one-size-fits-all proposition because the way schools are accredited, it's got to be 3 years, got to be this, got to be that. When in fact, I think there's probably a lot of ways to deliver high-quality legal education as well as other educations. And there ought to be more room for schools to try it, doing it in different lengths with different emphasis. I'm not confident that the one way we do it is the only way it can be done well, or that it's the right way to be done for everybody. But that would require sort of reconfiguring how we approach the enterprise in a way that I think would be helpful, but it's difficult because the legal profession has a lot of conservatism baked into it. And I understand why, because once you start messing with the variables I mentioned, that you could have some things go badly as well as go well. But if we're up to me, I think I'd allow some more experimentation for a lot of reasons, for the sake of better education, for the sake of keeping the costs under control so that people can afford to go to law school and then they can afford to practice law and help people who need access to legal services. And there's a lot of reasons why I think loosening up and allowing the market to have a little more room to work would be really helpful. But I think we're still some distance from that.
And is there a way we can maybe get more legal education into our undergraduate curriculum? I mean,
Wow.
Berkeley has a jurisprudence program. I remember when I was at Penn, the Wharton School had undergraduate legal classes, but most universities don't offer anything quite like that. Maybe, you get con law in a poli-sci class, but that's about it.
Well, I mentioned civics earlier. I mean, I really think that ought to be a centerpiece of most students' undergraduate education. Whatever else you're going to do, you're going to be a citizen. You're going to vote. You're going to take part in public discourse or private discourse. You need to know your way around our traditions of government, which includes some law. I don't think there's any way to understand that without also being a student of some law. Understanding the Constitution, not just saying, oh, that's for lawyers to worry about. It's really for everybody to worry about. And I don't think it's that difficult to transmit a lot of basic information to undergraduates, or for that matter, high school kids. I don't really understand the logic of treating that as optional. It's absolutely crucial to read these novels, but as far as the Constitution goes, maybe they'll get to that, maybe they won't. I don't know. I think I think there's room for that in every curriculum for everybody. And I think if we're trying to prepare people to act responsibly in a democracy where everybody's got responsibilities, that's got to be part of it. So I'd like to see much more integration of law and legal knowledge and government throughout our system. We're a long way from that, but I hope there's some appetite for that, and perhaps there is.
Well, Ward, thanks so much for joining me. We didn't even get into the classical series. Maybe we'll do that some other day. Okay.
Some other day. Anyway, Greg, wonderful to be with you. I enjoyed the conversation. Thank you so much.
Sure. We'll talk again. Bye.
Unsiloed podcast is produced by University FM, elevating the stories of your institution.